The valley of Oakhaven did not like surprises. Its rhythms were as old as the mountains that cradled it, the slow turn of the seasons, the predictable paths of sheep to high pasture and back, the daily ring of hammer on iron from Harlan's forge. It was a place where a new calf was news, and a stranger was an event. So when the shepherdess came, the entire village found a reason to be near the green that day. She walked ahead of a small, dusty flock of sheep, a staff in her hand. Her posture was straight, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, but a careful observer might have noted the tight grip on the wood. Her clothes were simple and worn, like those of any traveler. But it was not her clothes that drew the eye. From the collar of her dress, across her neck and up the curve of her cheek, and down the backs of her hands, spread a pattern. It was not a scar, nor a stain, but something that seemed part of the very skin itself, an intricate design like the delicate veins on a leaf or the frost feathers on a winter pane. It was a tapestry of soft browns and faint, earthy russets, beautiful in its strangeness, and utterly unknown to Oakhaven. A hush fell, broken only by the bleating of sheep. Mothers, without a word, pulled their children close, turning young faces away. "Don't look there," came the murmured instruction, a whisper meant to be kind but landing like a chill wind. Eyes were averted, fixed on the ground or the sky, anywhere but on the marked woman. Harlan the blacksmith, a man built like an oak trunk, crossed his massive arms, his frown a clear sign of the community's judgment. This was a breach in the natural order. Only one person did not look away. Darian, the rancher, stood apart as he often did, leaning against the fence post of the corral where his horses grazed. He was a man of few words and much watching, more comfortable with the language of animals than the chatter of people. His gaze, a steady, penetrating blue, settled on the shepherdess and did not waver. He did not stare with the village's shock or fear. He looked with the profound, analyzing focus he gave to a skittish colt, seeing not just the anomaly, but the whole creature within it. He saw the pride in her spine, the weariness in her step, the defiant lift of her chin as she felt the collective weight of their avoidance. His attention was a silent, solid thing in the sea of their rejection. The shepherdess, whose name was Lyra, felt this singular gaze like a point of warmth on a cold day. Against instinct, her own eyes flicked toward his. For a heartbeat, their looks locked. In his, she found no pity, no disgust, only a deep and unsettling curiosity. It was more unnerving than the averted faces, and yet, it sparked a faint, unfamiliar ember in her chest, not shame, but something alive and alert. She moved on, securing the use of the old widow's cottage on the far western rim of the valley, a place long empty and half forgotten, perfect for one they wished to forget. Life settled into a new, tense pattern. Lyra tended her flock, kept to herself, and spoke to no one. The villagers, when they passed her on the track, would offer a stiff nod, but their eyes would slide over and past her, adhering to the unspoken rule, "Don't look there." But Darian looked. Every morning, as he rode the high ridge to check his cattle, he would pause, a dark silhouette against the dawn sky, and look down toward her cottage and the small figure moving among the sheep. In the evening, from his porch, he would watch the smoke curl from her chimney. He never approached, never waved. He simply observed, as if studying the habits of a rare bird that had landed in his territory. His constant, silent watch became the one fixed point in her new existence, a strange and prickly comfort. She was unseen by the many, but she was seen, profoundly and completely, by one. And in that silent, distant attention, a thread was spun across the empty valley, fine as spider silk but strong as steel, waiting for a wind to pull it taut. The heat of late summer laid a heavy hand over Oakhaven, thickening the air in the lanes and drawing the scent of pine and dry earth from the surrounding hills. For Lyra, the season was a trial. The cottage, though a shelter, was an oven by afternoon, and the relentless sun seemed to press down on her with the same weight as the villagers' silent judgment. Her only relief came in the deepening twilight, a private ritual performed in the small, walled yard behind her home. There, she would pour cool water from the well into a chipped basin, using a rough cloth to wash away the dust of the day from her neck, her shoulders, the back of her arms. It was during this private moment, with the first stars pricking the violet sky, that Darian finally crossed the distance he had so long maintained. The sight that had drawn him was one of profound and unguarded simplicity. From his vantage on the ridge, he saw her in the walled yard, her back to the world, her dress unlaced and slipped down to her waist. The fading light caught the beads of water on her skin, and on the intricate, sweeping patterns that graced her from shoulder to shoulder and down the line of her spine. In that light, they were not a mark of difference, but a living map of something ancient and wild, a topography of secrets written on flesh. The careful, proud shepherdess was gone, replaced by a figure of solitary, unself-conscious beauty, a portrait of relief from the day's burdens. A force within him, stronger than reason or custom, pulled him down from the ridge. He moved not with the stealth of a hunter, but with the deliberate, inevitable pace of a man answering a summons only he could hear. He pushed open the low wooden gate, its creak breaking the evening quiet. Lyra froze, the damp cloth in her hand, water trickling down her spine. She did not turn, sensing a presence large and male, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then he was there, behind her, his shadow merging with hers on the stone wall. She could smell the leather, sun-warmed hide, and honest sweat of him. For an endless second, there was only the sound of their breathing and the distant call of a night bird. He did not speak. He simply raised his hand, and with a single, calloused fingertip, he touched her. The contact was a lightning strike. His rough skin traced the delicate, swirling pattern just below her left shoulder blade, following its path with a reverence that was tactile, searching. It was not a medical examination, nor the curious poke of a child. It was the touch of a reader deciphering a sacred text, a traveler tracing a route on a long-sought map. A shock, pure and electric, jolted through Lyra, rooting her to the spot. It was not fear that paralyzed her, but the sheer, overwhelming violation of a barrier she had believed was permanent. No one had touched her there, not since she was a small child. The sensation was an avalanche, first the startling intimacy, then a wave of heat that burned through her core, melting the ice of her isolation. A soft, sharp gasp escaped her lips, swallowed by the twilight. The spell was shattered by a rustle in the oleander bushes by the fence. Tommen, the miller's young son, sent to fetch a stray goat, had seen it all, the rancher's approach, the silent standing, the deliberate, intimate touch. His eyes wide as wagon wheels, he scrambled backward and then ran, his feet pounding the dirt track toward the village center, toward the warm light of the tavern and the ears of Harlan the blacksmith. In the yard, Lyra finally turned, clutching her dress to her chest. Her eyes, wide and dark, met Darian's. In his face, she saw no triumph, no smirk of conquest, only that same deep, focused intensity, now shimmering with a heat that answered the one now pooling in her own belly. He had crossed every line, and in doing so, had not taken something, but had given her a terrifying, exhilarating revelation. She could be touched, and in the touching, could feel alive. Without a word, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked back into the gathering dark, leaving her trembling by the cool basin. The news, carried by Tommen's breathless voice, spread through Oakhaven like a grass fire. Whispers turned to exclamations in the tavern. Harlan's face darkened like a thunderhead. Darian had not just looked, he had laid hands upon the marked woman. He had broken the most fundamental law of their quiet society, to shun the unknown. It was an act of profound defiance, a pollution of their collective will. By the time Darian walked into the tavern an hour later, the air was thick with anger. Harlan stood, his bulk blocking the firelight. "You," Harlan's voice boomed, silencing the room. "You touched that, marked creature." The words were a verdict. Darian met his gaze, unflinching. "I did." His simple admission fanned the rage. Harlan stepped closer, the others a grim chorus behind him. "You have made yourself unclean by her. Your hand is as cursed as her skin. You are no longer welcome among us. You share her exile." The sentence was cast. Darian, by a single touch, had severed his ties to the village, trading his place among them for the secret, electric charge still humming on his fingertip and the memory of a map he had only just begun to explore. The line in the dirt had been drawn, and he now stood firmly, irrevocably, on the other side, with her. The shunning was not a loud event, but a quiet, absolute one. Where Darian had once been met with nods, he now found closed doors and averted faces. Orders for horses were withdrawn. No one came to his ranch. In the village square, conversations would cease as he approached, leaving a pocket of hollow silence he was expected to pass through. The judgment was total. Yet, this isolation felt different from his natural solitude. It was a cold wall, not an open space. His gaze, as he rode his land, turned more and more often to the thin plume of smoke rising from the shepherdess's distant cottage. For Lyra, the exile was familiar, but now it was shared, and that changed its texture. The boys' gossip had painted her not just as marked, but as a temptress, a creature who had ensnared a good man. Her firewood was found scattered one morning, a petty but clear warning. The shared punishment created a bond of circumstance, a bridge across the valley built not of wood, but of mutual consequence. The thread of his attention had been pulled taut, and now it began to draw them together. The catalyst was the sky. A bruised purple crept over the mountain peaks days earlier than the almanac predicted, and the wind carried not the scent of hay, but a metallic hint of ice. An early, savage snow was coming, a killer of flocks trapped in open fields. Lyra, watching the ominous clouds gather, felt a fist of dread tighten in her stomach. Her cottage could not shelter 24 sheep. They would die in the field, and she would be ruined. She saw him then, a dark figure on horseback cutting across the lower meadow, heading not toward the village, but directly for her. Darian reined in his horse a respectful distance away, his expression grim and practical. "That storm will be here before midnight," he stated, his voice the first words he had ever spoken to her, deep and weathered like stone. "Your sheep will die. My barn is large, and my south pasture has a stone windbreak. Bring your flock. There is room." It was not a request, nor was it an offer born of polite charity. It was a statement of logistical truth from one outcast to another. The choice was between pride and survival. Lyra, after a long moment measuring the certainty in his eyes against the churning sky, simply nodded. The work was hard and wordless, a frantic dance against the descending chill. They drove the combined flocks, her nervous sheep, his calm cattle, into the shelter of his sprawling, solid barn and the protected pasture beside it. The first flakes began to swirl as they secured the final gate. Inside his ranch house, the world shrank to the crackle of a great stone hearth and the howl of the wind outside. The space was masculine and orderly, filled with the tools of his trade and the smell of wood smoke and leather. They moved around each other in the main room with a careful distance, the enormity of their situation settling upon them. He offered her stew from a pot that had simmered all day. She accepted it, the simple act of eating together at his heavy table another silent breach of the old life. Night fell, deep and absolute, the storm swallowing the world beyond the firelight. They spoke then, haltingly at first. He asked about sheep, a safe subject. She asked about horses. The questions slowly peeled back the layers of their solitude. He spoke of the weight of running a ranch alone, the constant vigilance. She spoke of the loneliness of constant travel, of eyes that always slid away. The shared experience of being watched, he from a distance by her, she by the entire village, hung between them, a strange, inverted intimacy. Why, she finally asked, her voice barely above the whisper of the flames. She set her bowl aside, turning fully to face him. Why did you stare every day? And why, she took a breath, the memory of his touch flushing her skin. Why did you touch me that way? Darian did not answer immediately. He poked at the fire, sending a cascade of sparks upward. His profile, etched in orange and shadow, was stark and serious. I stare at things I don't understand, he began, his voice low. A horse that shies at nothing. A cloud that does not move with the wind. You were a contradiction. You walked like a queen, but they treated you like a ghost. I needed to see the truth. He turned then, and his blue eyes captured hers, the intensity in them no longer observational, but consuming. And I touched you because what I saw was not a curse. It was a map. A beautiful, wild map. And a man who sees a map, he said, leaning slightly forward, the space between them crackling, feels a need to trace the path. To learn the territory. The confession was a key turning in a lock deep inside her. It undid the final bolt on her guarded heart. He did not see a flaw, he saw a landscape he desired to explore. The heat that had begun with his touch in the yard now roared through her, a wildfire fanned by his words. The careful distance between them on the hearthrug evaporated. It was she who closed it, driven by a year of loneliness and a lifetime of never being seen. Her hand came up to his jaw, rough with stubble. She saw the surprise in his eyes, and then the surrender. Their first kiss was not gentle. It was a collision of withheld need, a hungry claiming. It tasted of stew and honesty and storm air. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her into the solid wall of his chest, and she went willingly, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the fire's heat on their skin and the deeper, urgent heat building between them. He led her to his bedroom, a Spartan room dominated by a large bed frame hewn from dark timber. There, in the firelight that spilled from the open door, the exploration began in earnest. With a slow, deliberate patience that contrasted utterly with the storm's fury, he unlaced her dress, letting it pool at her feet. His eyes, his hands, worshipped the terrain he had described. He followed every whirl and arc of the pattern on her back with his lips, his tongue, learning its geography by taste and touch. He turned her to face him, his gaze sweeping over the markings that graced her collarbones, the slopes of her breasts. Every place she had learned to hide became a site of reverence. His own clothes were shed, revealing a body forged by hard labor, powerful and scarred. Her touch on him was just as curious, just as devout, tracing the lines of muscle, the stories written by bites and kicks and weather. When he entered her, it was with a slow, inexorable pressure that made her cry out, a sound of release rather than pain. The feeling was one of profound, shocking fullness, a joining that felt less like a new act and more like a homecoming. The rhythm they found was ancient, a dialogue of thrust and answer, a building storm of their own making. She met him move for move, her hips rising to meet his, her nails digging into the hard muscles of his back, claiming him as he claimed her. The pleasure was not a single point, but a wave that built from the very core of her, from the places he had looked at and touched without flinching, cresting in a silent, shattering peak that pulled his own release from him with a deep, guttural groan. In the long, trembling quiet that followed, tangled in the linens and each other, the exile was over. They had forged a new country of two, its borders drawn by touch, its law written in trust, and its foundation laid deep in the awakened flesh. Winter's first true grip on the valley cemented their seclusion, transforming it from a sentence into a sanctuary. The snow that had brought them together now piled in great drifts against the ranch house, sealing them in a private, white-walled world. In this enforced closeness, the raw, storm-fueled passion of their first night softened and deepened, weaving itself into the very fabric of their daily lives. Their bond became a living thing, nourished by shared labor and silent understandings, and ignited, again and again, by a hunger that seemed only to grow. Their love was not confined to the bed and the firelit room, though they returned to it often, with a frequency and an inventive hunger that astonished them both. It spilled into the hayloft of the barn, where the afternoon sun sliced through cracks in the boards, illuminating motes of dust dancing around their joined bodies on a rough-spun blanket. There, with the calm sounds of animals below, he would learn the ways she arched her back when his mouth found a certain spot on her neck, and she would discover the power of her own voice, her sighs and commands lost in the sweet, dry scent of hay. It found them by the hearth after supper, where a single look, a hand resting on a knee, could lead to her straddling him in the large wooden chair, there joining a slow, rocking burn that lasted until the logs collapsed into embers. He taught her the unspoken language of his body, and she, blossoming in this realm of absolute acceptance, learned to speak her own desires without shame, guiding his hands, his mouth, to where the pleasure pooled and ached for him. This deep, carnal knowledge forged a trust that was absolute. He saw her in every state, frustrated, weary, laughing, lost in ecstasy, and his gaze never wavered from its devotion. She saw the stern rancher become a man of whispered endearments and tender patience, his calloused hands capable of eliciting shivers as delicate as those caused by a breeze. They were two halves of a hidden whole, their union a secret axiom that made their isolated world make sense. Outside their snow-draped borders, however, the village's anger did not cool, it curdled. Harlan, seeing Darian's continued defiance in his absence from the tavern and the visible smoke from two chimneys now joined as one, interpreted their solitude not as exile but as insolence. The marked woman had not just bewitched Darian, she was corrupting the very order of the valley by holding him in her thrall. Whispers grew into plans. The safety of Oakhaven, Harlan argued to a group of concerned men at the forge, required the source of the trouble to be removed permanently. The confrontation came on a morning of brittle sunshine, the snow crunching like glass under heavy boots. Harlan led a group of 6 men, faces set in grim resolve, up the track to Darian's ranch. Their intention was clear in their clasped tools, not weapons of war, but the implements of their trades, symbols of the community's will. They came to drive the poison from their midst, to see Lyra cast out beyond the valley's mouth. They found her feeding chickens in the yard, Darian emerging from the barn at the sound of their approach. He moved to stand slightly before her, not touching, but his presence a clear shield. The air crackled with cold intention. "This has gone on long enough, Darian," Harlan boomed, his breath pluming in the air. "The woman goes today. She is a blight, and you are blinded." Darian's voice, when it came, was calm and carried the finality of a falling tree. "She is not going anywhere." "She has bewitched you," shouted another man, a farmer named Jotham. "She has opened my eyes," Darian countered, his gaze sweeping over the hostile faces. Then, he did the unthinkable. He reached back, found Lyra's hand, and drew her forward to stand beside him, their joined hands a blatant declaration. "She is my wife in heart, in flesh, and in spirit. There is no spell here but the truth you refuse to see." A ripple of furious muttering passed through the men. Harlan's face flushed dark red. "That mark is a curse. It signifies nothing but ill fortune." "You are wrong." A new voice, aged but clear, cut through the tension. Eloan, the village wise woman, emerged from the path behind the men, having followed their agitated procession. All turned to her, respect for her years and knowledge momentarily overriding their fury. She walked forward, her eyes not on the men, but on Lyra, studying her with a botanist's curiosity, not a bigot's fear. "I have studied such things in my books of old signs," Eloan said, addressing Harlan but speaking for all to hear. "The girl's mark is not a curse. It is a sigil of the deep earth. It signifies a rare harmony with living things. A conduit." She turned her wise eyes to Lyra. "Is it not true, child? Do not beasts come easily to you? Do not lost lambs find your voice?" Lyra, her heart pounding, found her voice. "Yes. The ewe whose lamb was stuck last week, she let me help when she would not let another near. The birds take seed from my hand." Eloan nodded, as if a theory was confirmed. "It is not sorcery. It is a kinship. The land speaks through her skin. You call it a curse, Harlan. I call it a gift we are too foolish to recognize. And a man who loves such a gift," she said, looking pointedly at Darian, "is not bewitched. He is wise." Her words landed among the men like stones in a still pond, creating ripples of doubt. Harlan stood confounded, his moral certainty challenged by the one person whose authority in such matters he could not dismiss. The mob's solid front fractured, their resolve seeping away into the snowy ground, replaced by a confused and shuffling silence. The wind of their purpose had been stolen, leaving them cold and aimless in the face of this unexpected defense. The claim of the heart, voiced aloud and supported by wisdom, had held the line. The standoff at the ranch did not end with a bang, but with a slow, thawing silence. Harlan and the men, their righteous fury punctured by Eloan's quiet authority, had turned and trudged back to the village, leaving behind only the deep scars of their boot prints in the snow. The valley held its breath. Darian and Lyra remained in their fortress of mutual devotion, but the world outside was no longer a mere backdrop, it was a jury still in deliberation. The acceptance they craved could not be won by Eloan's words alone, but would require a testament written in a language Oakhaven truly understood: action. Spring arrived not as a gentle guest, but as a violent usurper. Warm rains, relentless and heavy, fell upon the deep snowpack of the mountains. The creek that meandered through the lower village pastures, usually a benign trickle, grew fat and brown, then furious and roaring. It overflowed its banks not with a gradual creep, but with a savage intent, swallowing fences, and transforming rich grazing land into a churning, deadly lake. The village bell clanged in alarm as the water, cold and pitiless, swept toward the penned livestock, the lifeblood of Oakhaven. From the high ground of his ranch, Darian saw the disaster unfolding. He moved to saddle his horse, his mind on the strong timber of his barn, a potential refuge. But it was Lyra who stopped him with a hand on his arm. Her eyes were not on the panic below, but on the land itself, the contour of the hills, the ancient path of an old stream bed long dry, the way the pine trees clustered on a rocky knoll to the west. The map on her skin, it seemed, was mirrored in the valley's flesh. A deep, intuitive knowledge, humming in her blood since childhood and now fully trusted, rose to the surface. "The lower stock pens are lost," she said, her voice urgent but clear. "But the water will not rise past the granite ledge. The safe ground is the sheltering knoll. It is the only place." Darian searched her face, seeing not guesswork, but certainty. He gave a single, sharp nod. Without another word, they became a single, driving force. He rode to the village edge, his voice cutting through the chaos, directing men to drive cattle not to his distant barn, but to the high knoll Lyra had named. She, on foot and with a preternatural calm, waded into the confusion, she did not shout. She moved to the most frightened animals, a panicked milk cow separated from her calf, a herd of sheep milling in terrified circles. She placed her hands on wet flanks, spoke in low, rhythmic tones, and began to walk. And the beasts followed. They fell in behind her as if she were their born shepherd, their fear soothed by an authority they sensed in their very bones. Villagers, seeing the miracle, began driving their own animals to follow her strange, sure-footed procession up the sloping, dry path to the sheltering knoll. By the time the floodwaters reached their peak, a great, noisy congregation of every cow, sheep, and goat in Oakhaven stood safe on the high ground, steam rising from their backs in the sudden sun that broke through the clouds. Lyra stood among them, soaked and muddy, the patterns on her skin visible through her wet dress, no longer a mark of shame but a badge of strange command. The villagers, huddled and breathless on the same knoll, looked from their saved flocks to the shepherdess, and the last walls of their prejudice crumbled into the receding waters. Harlan, gripping the halter of his own prized bull, met Darian's eyes across the distance, and this time, his gaze held not anger, but a grudging, awe-filled respect. The aftermath was a season of slow mending, of fences both literal and figurative being rebuilt. Lyra's act had been irrefutable. She had translated the mysterious language of her being into a salvation they could all hold in their hands, the wool, the milk, the meat of their continued survival. At the midsummer festival, when the green was strung with lanterns and the air smelled of roasting meat and sweet cakes, Lyra walked beside Darian into the heart of the village. Her hand was in his, and her other rested gently on the gentle swell of her belly, a new life growing within the map of her skin, a testament to the love that had remade their world. There were no grand speeches. But there were nods, genuine and deep. A woman offered her a flower. Harlan, after a long moment, handed Darian a tankard of ale. It was not a fanfare, but a quiet, solid return to the community, now on entirely new and forged terms. That night, in their bedroom where the scent of summer meadows drifted through the open window, their loving was a celebration of this hard-won peace. It was slow and sweet, a deep communion of bodies that knew every secret of the other. His lips traced the now familiar pathways on her stomach, whispering promises to the child within. Her sighs were of contentment, of a belonging so complete it felt like the very heartbeat of the valley itself. They moved together in the moonlit dark, a joined dance of gratitude and profound, quiet joy, their union the sturdy root from which their future would now grow. If you've journeyed with Darian and Lyra from that first forbidden gaze to this hard-won acceptance, consider subscribing for more tales where love must navigate a world of shadows and secrets, where the deepest bonds are forged against the grain of society. New landscapes of passion and courage await your discovery.